As Americans watch the Iran war drag on, did a former top spy just reveal that Trump ignored, buried, or twisted his own intelligence community's warnings before pulling the trigger? If US intel really agreed Iran wasn't building a bomb, did Washington attack anyway on a different pretext? And what does that say about how the war was sold at home? When multiple agencies reportedly told the White House there was no imminent strike threat from Tehran, does that explode the narrative that America had no choice but to hit first? And if the same intel warned any attack would blow up the Strait of Hormuz and US bases, did Trump go in with eyes open about exactly how messy this war could get? As leaks pile up, is Trump's story, that Iran is on the brink of collapse and decimated, now colliding head-on with assessments saying Tehran's arsenal and system were built to survive? So as Hormuz burns and blockade risks mount, did Americans walk into this war under false assumptions, guided more by a foreign agenda than by their own intelligence? Amid mounting anger over the human and financial costs of the Iran war, a former senior US counterterrorism chief has gone public with claims that challenge the entire case for the conflict. Joe Kent, who until recently headed the National Counterterrorism Center, says the intelligence community assessed that Iran was not actively building a nuclear weapon when the strikes began. In a May 7 post on X, he wrote that US agencies, including the CIA, were in agreement that Iran posed no imminent threat of a direct attack on the United States. Kent also says the CIA and other services explicitly warned that military action would likely trigger chaos in the Strait of Hormuz, including attempts by Iran to shut or choke the waterway. According to him, those assessments predicted that if Israel and the US attacked, Iran would retaliate against US bases across the region, exactly as has since unfolded. Kent says the same reports concluded that targeting Iranian leadership elements would likely strengthen the regime's hardliners, rallying public opinion rather than sparking collapse. He argues that despite this, the narrative and agenda pushed by Israel ultimately won out in Washington, nudging the US into war against the grain of its own intel. Kent said, and I quote, "One of the many tragedies of this war is that before the war began the US intel community, including CIA, was in agreement that Iran wasn't developing a nuclear weapon and that Iran would target US bases in the region and shut down the Strait of Hormuz if they were attacked by Israel and the US. The IC also properly assessed that targeting the Iranian leadership would strengthen the regime and embolden the hardliners." Despite the professionalism and accuracy of the IC, the narrative and agenda spun by a foreign government, Israel, won the argument and forced us into this war. We need to understand exactly how this happened to ensure we are never put in this position again. Unquote. Kent had already resigned from his post at the National Counterterrorism Center in March, citing irreconcilable disagreement with the administration's Iran strategy. In his resignation letter, he said he could not in good conscience support the ongoing Iran-US conflict, given what he knew about the underlying intelligence. He argued that Iran posed no imminent threat to the US mainland and that the rush to war was driven more by outside pressure and politics than by urgent security needs. His stance triggered fierce backlash from Trump and allied commentators, who accused him of downplaying the Iranian threat and undermining the war effort.
Well, I read his statement. I always thought he was a nice guy, but I always thought he was weak on security, very weak on security. I didn't know him well, but I thought he seemed like a pretty nice guy. But when I read his statement, I realized that it's a good thing that he's out, because he said that Iran was not a threat. Iran was a threat. Every country realized what a threat Iran was. The question is whether or not they wanted to do something about it. And many people, many of the greatest military scholars are saying for years that presidents should have taken out Iran because they wanted a nuclear weapon. They were, if we didn't do the attack, or if, I'll go a step further, if I didn't terminate the Iran nuclear deal given to us, one of the worst deals ever made by Barack Hussein Obama. Remember when they sent Boeing 757s over there, loaded with cash, hundreds of millions of dollars? You would have been very happy. This was a wonderful, they said hundreds of millions. People forget that. Does anybody remember? Right? You remember. Hundreds of millions of dollars in a Boeing 757. I think there are two of them loaded. They took the seats out and they put cash. And it was so much that there wasn't a bank in Virginia, Maryland, or D.C. that had any money left. They stripped them of all their money, put it into place, sent it to Iran, almost as ransom. That's not going to happen with Trump. And nobody ever did anything about it. Nobody ever said anything about it. Can you imagine if I did that? So they've been a threat for a long time. But they've really been a threat if I didn't terminate Obama's horrible deal that he made, the Iran nuclear deal, you would have had a nuclear war 4 years ago. You would have had nuclear holocaust, and you would have had it again if we didn't bomb the site. So when somebody is working with us that says they didn't think Iran was a threat, we don't want those people because, and there are some people, I guess I would say that, but they're not smart people or they're not savvy people. Iran was a tremendous threat. And virtually every NATO nation, and this is the thing, if they told me it wasn't a threat, and therefore they don't want to help, but when they say it was a threat, and it was a major threat, every one of them, I think every one of them, I don't know of one that said they're not a threat, but when they say it was a threat, but we're not going to help, I think they're very foolish.
His latest comments land just as leaks about a new CIA assessment show Iran still retains around 70% of its missiles and 75% of its mobile launchers, and can likely withstand the Hormuz blockade for months, further undercutting Trump's victory claims. New intelligence findings now appear to contradict President Donald Trump's aggressive pressure campaign and blockade narrative against Iran recently. The Central Intelligence Agency reportedly believes Iran could survive an American blockade for several months despite growing military and economic pressure. According to intelligence assessments cited on May 7th, Tehran may withstand the blockade for nearly 90 to 120 days. Officials familiar with the classified report reportedly said Iran could potentially endure the blockade for an even longer period strategically. The CIA also concluded that Iran still retains major missile and drone capabilities despite continued attacks from the United States and Israel. The assessment found Tehran could avoid immediate economic collapse by relying on crude stockpiles and alternative smuggling routes effectively. These findings sharply contrast with Trump's repeated claims that the blockade is already inflicting severe damage on Iran's struggling economy. Trump had announced a U.S. naval blockade targeting Iranian ports across the Strait of Hormuz region on April 12.
$25 करोड़ गरीब गरीबी को परास्त करके बाहर निकले।
For the good of our nation, let's work together and let's truly make America great again.
The fastest news breaks.
Requested PM saying that look, you will have to speak to Putin and to Zelensky.
The biggest news makers.
The relationship with India is probably the most important bilateral relationship the U.S. will have for the rest of this century.
The capital delivered quite an election result today.
Expert analysis.
The million-dollar question today is how to stop this dance of death.
Ground reports.
I'm standing at the crossroad of the Kumbh Mela. Behind me are more than 100 entry ghats.
Long-form interviews.
Exclusionary politics is reflected in Manipur case as well. You don't bother because this is a small state.
Deep dive into burning issues.
It's often said DRC could be the richest country in the whole world. It's because of what sits underneath.
Why exactly did the US topple the Sheikh Hasina government?
HT videos. We don't just break news, we break it down.